The last thing I heard from that office was the soft, stupid little click of the light switch. It was the exact same sound it had made 20 years earlier, back when that office was just a forgotten corner with a wobbly chair, a dying bulb, and a whiteboard stained with someone else's half-erased scribbles. The only difference now was the view. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished desk, ergonomic chair that cost more than my first car, and a metal plate on the door that said, Chief Systems Architect. At least, for another few minutes. My name is Austin Phillips, but everyone in that building calls me Ace. I'm 47 years old, and that morning I had just been fired from the company I helped raise from a garage experiment into a $500 million software machine. I stood there with my hands still on the switch, watching the light die over my plants, my bookshelf, the framed photos of launches and late-night releases. Even the office fern seemed to slump a little, like it had heard the news and given up. Out in the hallway, I could hear that fake, muffled buzz of people pretending nothing was happening. When you've been somewhere as long as I have, your name becomes a rumor on organizational charts and a ghost in onboarding slides. And then, in one short restructuring meeting, you're gone like you were never there. 6 minutes. That's how long it took. It started at 9:42 a.m. My phone lit up with a message from Jordan's assistant. Something gentle and fake like, Hey Ace, can you pop by the CEO suite for a quick touch base? The kind of wording they use when they're about to give you a branded mug or kill you in a polite way. I knew the second I walked into that room that it wasn't about a mug. Jordan was behind the big desk, leaning back in a leather chair he hadn't earned, looking like a guy who cared more about his reflection in the window than any line of code in the building. On either side of him sat the HR duo, laptops open, faces already arranged into that corporate, concerned but professional expression. I used to joke and call them the beige twins. That morning, they looked less like HR and more like witnesses. Jordan stood up like we were old college buddies, stuck out his hand, and said my name in this overfamiliar tone that made my skin crawl. I remember thinking, you've never called me Austin a day in your life unless there was an audience. I didn't take his hand. I just sat down and waited. He gave me the speech I've heard other people get, the one you always think will never be about you. 20 years of my life boiled down into a few phrases. New chapter, fresh direction, modernization, legacy positions. He said the words fresh blood twice, like he liked the taste of them. The whole time he talked, I didn't really look at him. My attention drifted over his shoulder to a framed print on the wall. The very first version of our software interface, from back when TechFlow Dynamics was 4 people, 1 janky server, and a coffee maker that sounded like it was dying. I had built that first interface on a borrowed laptop on Hudson's back porch, fighting off mosquitoes and praying the power didn't go out. Now here I was, being told I was legacy. At one point Jordan said, You've had a good run. Like I was a racehorse they were sending to a cheaper track. One of the HR reps followed up with her own script about a supportive transition, outplacement assistance, and generous severance. 2 months of salary, continued benefits for a bit, someone to help me rewrite my resume so I could pretend I hadn't spent 2 decades keeping their world from catching fire. She eventually asked if I had anything I wanted to say. I just looked at Jordan and said, as calmly as I could, 20 years. I wanted the number to land in the room, to sit there between us. Not as a plea, not as a bargaining chip. Just a fact. 2 full decades. He smiled wider, like saying it out loud somehow proved his point that I was old news. Right, he said. 20 amazing years. But we're moving into a new phase. And that means certain. I stopped listening. The thing about working with systems as long as I have is that you start to hear noise differently. Underneath the buzzwords and corporate fluff, there was only one real message in that room. We think we can replace you, and we didn't bother to check what you still hold. I didn't ask, why me? I didn't ask who would maintain the core modules, who would handle the parts no one else had ever touched, who would fix the things that broke at 3 in the morning. I didn't mention the old contract language. I just nodded once, stood up, and told them I understood. One of the HR reps blinked like she couldn't believe I wasn't arguing. To her, silence looked like surrender. To me, it felt like lining up the first domino. When I stepped back into the hallway, the temperature felt wrong. Too cold for October, too bright for the kind of day where someone's life gets cut in half. People glanced up from their monitors, then snapped their eyes back down like I was contagious. A junior engineer I'd mentored for 3 years suddenly became very interested in an empty spreadsheet. A product manager who used to flood my inbox with urgent requests ducked into a conference room without turning on the light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single message from one of the few honest ones left. I just heard. I'm sorry. I can't even come over and say it. They're watching. I stared at the text for a second, swallowed whatever that did to my chest, and kept walking. I took the long way back to my office on purpose. I wanted them to see me with my badge still active, still walking on floors I'd helped wire up, past server closets I'd once slept next to during overnight upgrades. I didn't owe them a show, but I wanted witnesses, not of my humiliation, but of the way I left. Calm, upright. No security escort holding a cardboard box. The smell of reheated fish hit me near the operations pit. Someone had decided leftover seafood was a good idea in a shared microwave. That pretty much summed up the company's decision-making for the last 2 years. Short-sighted, thoughtless, annoying to everyone but the person doing it. When I reached my office, I closed the door behind me and just stood there for a moment, looking at what used to feel like a second home. On the wall, the photo from our first big launch party was slightly crooked. I never bothered to straighten it after the cleaning crew knocked it months ago. The picture showed me standing next to Hudson, the original founder, his arm thrown around my shoulders, both of us grinning in those cheap event night blazers. Back when his hair was thicker, and we thought compliance was just a word the lawyers said to scare us into commenting on documents. Hudson was chaos, talent, and coffee in human form, an engineer first, a CEO by accident. He understood code. He respected people who could build things from nothing. If he had still been in charge day to day, that meeting this morning never would have happened. But Hudson was mostly on the board now, buried in strategy decks and vineyard retreats, and his son Jordan liked to remind everyone that it was a new era. I grabbed my personal laptop from under the desk, slid it into my beat-up canvas tote. Next was the red leather binder from the back of my file cabinet, the one nobody ever asked about because it didn't have a label on the spine. I ran my hand over the worn cover, feeling the years in it. That binder had a weight far greater than paper and plastic. It was proof that there is a difference between the company thinks it owns something and the paperwork says otherwise. I took my old mug too, a ceramic thing with a fading slogan about coffee and debugging. There was a hairline crack running down one side that caught the light like a tiny fault line every morning. I always thought it was the most honest thing on my desk. Useful, damaged, hanging in there anyway. I left almost everything else. The technical books could stay for whoever ended up in my chair next. The framed certificates, the little award plaques, the outdated conference badges, they belonged to the story they were trying to tell about themselves, not to me. When I walked out and pulled the office door shut, I didn't bother to lock it. It wasn't mine anymore, at least not officially. I ignored the elevator and took the stairs, all 5 flights. My knees complained a little on the way down, my body reminding me I wasn't the 27-year-old kid who wrote the first kernel of our system while a cat walked across his keyboard. By the time I hit the lobby, my breathing had evened out, and my head was strangely clear. Outside, the sky was the color of a cheap metal filing cabinet, and a light drizzle had started, dotting the concrete and shining on the parked cars. I walked straight to my old sedan, opened the driver's door, and let the rain hit the fabric as I slid in. For a second, I just sat there with the door open, listening. Inside the building behind me, someone's badge was probably already being deactivated. My email had likely been disabled before I even reached the first landing of the stairwell. There were forms being filed, access lists updated, incident tickets open to reassign my projects. They thought they were closing a chapter. I finally shut the car door, took my phone out, and stared at the screen. Notifications were already stacking up. Calendar reminders I no longer cared about. A couple of nervous messages from people brave enough for a quick, "Are you okay?" Automated alerts from monitoring tools that still had me on their contact list. I powered the phone down mid-vibration. The screen went black, and for the first time in years, it stayed that way by choice. The company-issued laptop was in the trunk. Technically, I was supposed to drop it at IT before I left. I would eventually, When it made sense. When the dust settled. When the right person came asking the right way. I put the red binder on the passenger seat, the leather whispering when it rubbed against the canvas of my bag. For a long moment, I just looked at it. That thing had been sitting in a dark drawer for years, waiting quietly, the way a fire extinguisher waits in a hallway. People walk past it 1,000 times, never thinking they might need it, until the day everything finally catches fire. I started the engine, but I didn't point the car toward home. Instead, I turned in the opposite direction, away from the office park, away from the glass building where they had just tried to erase me with a line in a spreadsheet. There was a little cafe near the public library, a place with chipped saucers, mismatched chairs, and Wi-Fi that only worked when it felt like it. I hadn't been there in years. As I pulled out onto the main road, wipers squeaking over the windshield, I realized something simple and cold. From this moment on, nothing I did was for that company anymore. But that didn't mean I was done with them. Not even close. I don't remember deciding to drive to the cafe. My hands did it on their own, turning the wheel left at the light, cutting through the stretch of strip malls and gas stations I'd seen 1,000 times. The rain had settled into that thin, misty drizzle Texas gets in October. Light enough to ignore, heavy enough to soak you anyway. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the small lot behind the public library. The cafe sat tucked under a faded awning, still painted that chipped green it had when Hudson and I used to come here back in the garage days. The sign in the window flickered between open and, well, also open but with the bottom half of the bulbs dead. Some things never changed. I stepped inside, and the air smelled like espresso, cinnamon, and nostalgia. Dangerous combination when you've just been fired. The barista behind the counter squinted at me for a second. Then her eyes widened. Ace? No way. Haven't seen you in forever. I told her it had been a hectic decade. She laughed and nodded toward the pastry case. Still make those molasses cookies you used to inhale. I ordered one, grabbed a coffee, and headed to the corner table near the back. My usual spot from the days when office meant wherever the Wi-Fi worked long enough to push a commit. That same old chair was still there, the one with one leg shorter than the others. It wobbled every time you leaned forward, like a reminder not to get too comfortable. I didn't mind. Made the world feel real. I slid my tote off my shoulder and pulled out the red leather binder. The thing looked older than it really was, its edges worn soft, the corners bent like a book someone had read 100 times. I set it on the table slowly, almost with reverence. It wasn't just paper. It was history, insurance, leverage, and, most importantly, truth. No one at the cafe cared, of course. A couple was arguing quietly at another table. A college kid scribbled notes into a textbook. A man in a suit fought a losing battle with a USB charger he kept trying to force in upside down. Life went on. I opened the binder. The first page hit me with a jolt of memory. Initial agreement, July 2004. My name on one line, Hudson's on the next. Back then, we were 4 people in his garage, surrounded by empty Red Bull cans and a cat that kept knocking the router off the shelf. I hadn't taken a salary that summer. We barely had enough funding to keep the lights on, and Hudson, brilliant, chaotic Hudson, said, Ace, we'll fix the paperwork once we're legit. So we drafted a placeholder agreement. Not perfect, not detailed, but notarized and clean enough to hold up if we ever needed it. And that was the part nobody remembered. Ownership of the core source code, libraries, and compiled executables remains with the author, AP, until full transfer of equity or a written assignment is completed. Back then, it had seemed harmless. A formality. Just 2 guys trying to protect each other from whatever nonsense came next. Except nobody ever updated it. We incorporated a year later. Hired interns, built client portfolios, onboard CFOs who didn't know what Git was. But that clause 7.3, stayed right where it was. Untouched, unchallenged, unseen. I flipped to the next tab. Email thread, 2008. Hey Hudson, hey team. Just checking in about formalizing IP transfer before the next funding round. The reply from our then legal lead. Let's revisit after Q3. We're slammed right now. I snorted. After Q3 had been the corporate version of "We'll see" for 20 years. Next tab, 2012. Another reminder from me. Another hand-waving brush-off. Then 2015. Same thing. 2019. Audit note recommending IP cleanup. Ignored. I had kept every reminder, every response, every polite dismissal. Not because I expected this day. Not because I was planning revenge. But because I knew how this industry worked. People forget. Companies forget faster. Paper never does. Somewhere around 2010, when we needed a clean way to process contractor payments and licensing fees, I'd created a shell company, Apex Systems LLC. Standard practice back then. It was supposed to be folded into TechFlow's IP trust once our lawyers had bandwidth. They never had bandwidth, so Apex never got absorbed. It just sat there, quietly becoming the house that the foundation of our entire system was built on. I took a long sip of coffee, the kind that's too hot but wakes your bloodstream up like it's signing employment papers. My laptop, not the company's, was next. I flipped it open, connected to the cafe Wi-Fi, after begging the router to cooperate, and pulled up my email. Not my company email. That was already dead. My personal one. I typed out a message. Subject: IP licensing and assignment discussion. Hey Chuck. Ready to talk? Interesting morning. Attaching documents. I added scanned copies of the binder tabs. Then I hit send. There. The match had touched the fuse. Not a hack. Not sabotage. Just the system enforcing what the paperwork already said. When Ace is gone, the door locks behind him. I leaned back in my chair. The wobble sent a small jolt through the wood, grounding me. I let out a slow breath. The truth is, I didn't want the system to fail. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's job. I knew what our customers did with our platform. Hospitals using our compliance modules, insurance groups using our secure dashboards, government agencies relying on our authentication flow. Real people needed what we built. But I also wasn't going to let them kick me out like a spent battery and pretend I hadn't given them half my life. There's a difference between destruction and accountability. I heard my phone buzz once in my pocket. Just one vibration. I normally would have checked it immediately, but this time I didn't. I already knew who it was. Someone from the company, or maybe a coworker brave enough for a WTF just happened. But then a second vibration came, and a third, then a cascade, so many that the phone felt alive. I finally pulled it out. The notifications stacked so fast they blurred. System alert. Authentication flow timeout. System alert. Back-end token refusal. Client incident high priority. Client incident government contract access failure. DevOps triage urgent. Ping from Lisa M. Ace, are you seeing this? Ping from unknown number. Call me now. Jordan's panic was spreading through the source tree like a virus. The system wasn't broken. It was simply asking for the one thing nobody in that building had bothered to keep track of. Proof of ownership. Without my license key, the core modules didn't recognize them. I powered the phone off again. Back to silence. The cookie on my plate was still warm. I broke it in half, watched the steam slip out, and took a bite. I wasn't smiling yet, but I felt something shift inside me. Like a door I'd been holding shut for years had finally swung open. I wasn't done with them, and the day wasn't done with me. I opened my laptop again and refreshed the passive status dashboard I still had access to, thanks to an old build process nobody had bothered to clean up. More alerts flashed red. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. This wasn't the victory. This was just the beginning of the negotiation. Because somewhere across town, in a conference room where everyone was sweating through their button-ups and sipping burnt office coffee, someone was about to ask the question they should have asked before they fired me. Who actually owns the system? And the answer wasn't going to make their afternoon any easier. I didn't plan on watching the meltdown. Honestly, after I sent the documents to Chuck, my lawyer, I expected the day to unfold slowly. Maybe a few worried emails, a couple of confused IT pings, then eventually someone in legal realizing the house they'd been living in all these years was technically built on my land. But the collapse didn't come slowly. It came like a cracking dam. Small sounds at first, then a roar. I was halfway through my cookie when the first real alert popped on my laptop screen, one of the passive system dashboards I still had read-only access to, thanks to some dusty old DevOps pipeline no one had bothered to decommission. AuthX Core, 37% error rate. Severity, high. Unverified license signature. The drizzle outside thickened into steady rain, tapping the cafe window in a quickening rhythm, almost in sync with the errors blooming across my screen. Someone across town must have just tried to push a patch. Someone else must have tried to reboot a container. And somewhere deeper in the system, the core modules said the digital equivalent of, "Who are you? And why are you touching me?" I refreshed the logs. The numbers didn't stabilize. They climbed. Fast. My phone, which I'd powered back on only long enough to send the DocuSign code to Chuck earlier, started vibrating like a trapped insect. Missed calls, texts, system-generated alerts, even a couple of frantic Slack messages from people who should have known my account was already disabled. I flipped it face down again. Let the chaos roll. I didn't need to look at my phone to know what was happening inside TechFlow headquarters, but I couldn't resist imagining it. Rows of engineers staring at screens that suddenly refused to authenticate, managers barking orders they didn't understand, interns pretending they'd seen this kind of thing before. Then, almost on cue, an email pinged to my personal inbox. From Lisa M. Subject: "Please tell me you didn't." Message: "Ace, what is this? Did they seriously terminate your contract? Did they not review the agreement? Please tell me you have a plan. We're locked out of the routing layer. Like, all of us. This is bad. Really bad." I didn't reply. Not yet. But I felt something twist in my chest. Lisa was one of the few good ones, smart, earnest, the first to jump into the fire when systems went down. She didn't deserve this. None of the tech team did. They were just doing what they were told, running on too little sleep and too many demands. The people who deserved this were upstairs. I took a slow breath and reminded myself of the line I'd drawn in my head. I wasn't here to punish the innocent, only the arrogant, only the ones who thought I was replaceable. Across the city, in a building full of glass and ambition, the storm I'd predicted finally touched down. By 10:17 a.m., the East Coast Healthcare Portal, the one with the strictest SLA, the one whose compliance reports had to be timestamped to the minute, timed out mid-login for 6 administrators. 2 minutes later, their help desk forwarded the issue to our support queue. 5 minutes after that, the insurance module flagged for internal failures. By 10:26, someone in a federal contractor's office had left a voicemail dripping with impatience. "Your system is down. This is unacceptable. Call us back." Not broken, just locked. Authenticating, rejecting. A heartbeat server routing everything through an IP signature that pointed back to one entity. Apex Systems LLC, registered owner, Austin Phillips. Me. I imagined the moment someone in DevOps saw that line. Probably Danny. Good guy. Panics like a cat in a thunderstorm. But he means well. I could practically see him blinking at the screen while running diagram scripts so fast his keyboard rattled. He'd be shouting across the room for Lisa. She'd come running, see the logs, and whisper something like, "Oh no, oh no, no, no." She always whispered bad news. Then someone would escalate, and someone above them would freak out. By 11:02 a.m., the system logs reflected something I'd seen only twice in 20 years. Core access attempts by accounts with executive-level clearance. Jordan's clearance included. Every attempt failed. The back end didn't recognize him. A few seconds later, the server room camera would have captured Jordan storming in like he expected the racks to salute him. I could picture it vividly. Tie loosened, ego bruised, voice raised at hardware like it was purposely disobeying him. I had worked beside those racks for years. They never disobeyed. They just followed the rules. And the rules said, until the license is transferred in writing, access rights belong to the author. Jordan had fired the author. So the system did exactly what it was supposed to do. The cafe around me hummed quietly. A baby fussed somewhere near the front. Someone's laptop chimed with a calendar alert. The world was normal here. Not 15 miles away, TechFlow Dynamics was unraveling. A man at the next table cursed softly as he tried plugging his charger upside down for the third time. I almost leaned over to help, but honestly, I had bigger things to watch. The logs stuttered again. Requests, 2,174. Failures, 847. Escalations, 39. Root access attempts, 5. Successful root access, 0. I sipped my coffee. Not smug. Not vengeful. Just steady. Just watching what happened when 20 years of negligence finally came due. My inbox chimed again, this time from Chuck. Got the docs. Reviewing now. If everything checks out, they're in serious trouble. Call it 2. Don't respond to anything from them yet. Good man. I closed the laptop for a moment, letting the steam from the coffee warm my face. The world outside blurred behind a thin sheet of rain. Somewhere above the clouds, a corporate storm was brewing harder. Meanwhile, back at HQ, by noon, a third of our client stack couldn't access their dashboards. Calls poured in. Sales teams panicked. Legal began hunting for unwritten assurances they swore existed somewhere. DevOps tried tracing the problem upstream, only to discover the upstream didn't exist in their environment anymore. Because the heartbeat server, the one routing the entire central nervous system of TechFlow, wasn't gone. It was simply unreachable, masking itself behind the same licensing wrapper it always had. Only now, without me, the signature handshake had no one to greet. Somewhere around 12:30, someone must have said the sentence. Did Austin leave a credentials document before he left? And someone else must have answered, no, he left a binder. At 12:46, the company's general counsel tried something desperate. An emergency patch designed to bypass the failing authentication module. A brute force override. It bounced back instantly with a legal stop. Unauthorized access attempt logged. Primary license holder not verified. Patch request denied under operating agreement. I could almost hear the sound of that lawyer's blood pressure spiking. Then came the kicker. License owner. Apex Systems LLC. Registered representative. Austin Phillips. Upstairs, someone definitely swore out loud. And that someone was almost certainly Jordan's father. Hudson. The founder. The man who knew exactly what he had signed in 2004. Some assistant must have called him at his vineyard in Sonoma. I imagined him nearly spitting out some wine that cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. Hudson would have barked into the phone. What do you mean, Austin owns the platform? Someone would try to explain. Someone else would try to soften it. And Hudson, old school, sharp, unforgiving when it mattered, would tear through all their excuses like wet paper. By early afternoon, the board had been summoned. Jordan had been cornered. Legal had shown up with sweaty collars and printouts they could barely hold steady. And every single one of them had finally realized. They had fired the architect without making sure they owned the blueprints. I didn't need to imagine every detail. I'd lived too many crises in that building not to know exactly how panic looked in those halls. It looked like interns running with chargers. It looked like executives yelling into muted conference lines. It looked like lawyers whispering, "We're exposed." It looked like a CEO sweating through his $600 dress shirt. It looked like a company realizing the foundation they thought they controlled was, and always had been, signed under my name. At 1:58 p.m., I packed up my laptop and the binder, tossed the last crumbs of my cookie into a napkin, and stood. The rain had eased outside, leaving damp pavement that reflected the gray sky like a warped mirror. I stepped into the cool air, took one long breath, and walked to my car. As I slid behind the wheel, the quiet felt different. Not peaceful, purposeful. By the time I pulled onto the road again, the decision was made. They wanted to restructure. Fine. I would restructure the entire balance of power. At 2 p.m. sharp, Chuck called. His voice was steady, almost amused. "Ace," he said, "I hope you're ready, because they just realized they're negotiating for their life." I smiled for the first time that day. The real confrontation was about to begin. By the time I reached downtown, the sky had shifted to that flat, pale blue Texas gets in late afternoon. Calm, indifferent, totally unaware that $500 million worth of corporate ego was melting into a puddle somewhere across town. Chuck's office sat on the 23rd floor of a stone and glass tower, the kind of place where the lobby smells like polished marble and generational wealth. The elevator ride-up was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the entire building somehow knew the legal equivalent of a meteor strike was about to happen behind one of its meeting room doors. When I stepped out into the hallway, Chuck was already waiting for me. He had that look he always got when something big was about to happen. Calm smile, eyes sharp, like a surgeon who genuinely enjoys his job. "Afternoon, Ace," he said. "You ready?" "Been ready for 20 years," I told him. He laughed and gestured me into the glass conference room. The table inside looked like a runway, long, spotless, and made for dramatic moments. On it sat a thick bound packet of documents. My documents. My leverage. My 20-year insurance policy. Chuck slid the packet toward me as I Saturday. "Everything here is drafted exactly as you requested. They've called 6 times since 7 this morning. 3 board members. Hudson twice. And," he added with a smirk, "Jordan." Though he didn't leave his name. I didn't bother hiding my grin. "Coward." Chuck shrugged. He sounded like a man watching every contingency plan collapse at once. "Good," I said. "Let's get into it." The contract was clean, surgical, elegant. Exactly the opposite of the chaos unfolding at TechFlow. 3-year exclusive license to the entire back-end infrastructure. $90 million upfront, wired upon signing. Royalties on each new enterprise client and each additional seat sold. A board-level advisory role with architectural veto power, meaning no executive could make a technical decision that affected the core system without my approval. And 2 of the most important clauses. Clause 14, public retraction. TechFlow would formally announce that my departure had been a misunderstanding due to internal miscommunication, and that I had never been terminated for cause. Save face for them. Restore reputation for me. Clause 15, operational restructuring. Jordan Blackstone would resign from all operating authority immediately. He could keep a board seat if they wanted to save his pride. But he wasn't touching the product. Not ever again. I flipped through each page slowly, letting the weight of them settle. Chuck watched my face as he talked me through the legal language. Some I knew, some I didn't, all of it ironclad. "You're in the strongest position a fired employee has ever been in," he said. "There's no need to bargain. No need to soften anything. They need you to sign this. If you walk away without a deal, that company collapses. Simple as that." I nodded. I already knew. I had known since the minute my badge still worked on the way out and Jordan hadn't understood what that meant. The truth was, I didn't want them destroyed. I didn't want engineers losing jobs or clients being left in the dark or the product dying. I had poured too much of myself into the system to let it crash just because the wrong man inherited a throne he didn't deserve. I wasn't burning down the house. I was making sure the house paid rent. Chuck leaned back and crossed his arms. "One question before we finalize." "Shoot. Are you sure you don't want your job back? CTO position's yours if you want it. They'll practically hand you the office keys and a crown." I didn't even hesitate. "No," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "No. I'm done being the guy they call at 2 a.m. I'm done writing miracles for people who can't distinguish a JSON file from a grocery list. I want control. I want respect. And I want distance." Chuck nodded, satisfied. "Good answer." We went over the packet one more time. When I finally picked up the pen, I felt something shift inside me, like closing the last page of a long, painful chapter. I signed my name on the final page, the ink drying bold and permanent. Chuck gathered the documents. "They'll have the message within the hour." 15 miles away, TechFlow's boardroom must have been a battlefield. Hudson, who had flown in on his private jet earlier that afternoon, probably stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, eyes blazing with the fury of a man who had just learned his son nearly lost him a fortune. Board members pacing, lawyers sweating, IT leadership whispering worst-case scenarios. Jordan, humiliated, cornered, terrified, insisting it was a miscommunication. It wasn't miscommunication. It was arrogance wrapped in a suit. And now, they had no choice but to swallow every condition I'd written. I walked out of Chuck's building with the packet left behind and the future firmly in my pocket. The city stretched out below, traffic humming, people crossing streets, the world blissfully unaware that a quiet coup had just taken place. I took the long way back to the parking garage. The breeze carried the earthy smell of recent rain, and the sun had finally pushed through the clouds, hitting the pavement in bright streaks. The day felt lighter than any day had felt in years. When I reached my car, I leaned against the door for a moment, watching the skyline. Then my phone buzzed. Not the panicked vibration from earlier, just one buzz, a single notification. Email, subject accepted. I opened it. Everything was formal, clear, final. They accepted all terms. Every clause, every condition. Jordan was removed from operational authority effective immediately. The public statement draft was attached. The wire confirmation for the first transfer was pending. They even added a small, pathetic sentence at the bottom. "We hope you will consider rejoining us in the future." I laughed, out loud. A real one. They hadn't just lost the negotiation. They had surrendered. I drove back toward the office park, not to return, but to see it one last time. The building looked the same as always. Tall, cold, sterile. Rows of windows reflecting the sky, unaware of what had changed inside. I parked near the back entrance and walked toward the familiar hallway. The plant outside my old office door was still there, leaves drooping as always. I reached for the handle, even though the office wasn't mine anymore. The door opened anyway. No one had rekeyed it yet. I stepped inside. It smelled like old carpet and startup dreams. The lights were off. The room was quiet. My desk was empty except for the grooves left behind by years of typing, debugging, building things no one else could ever fully understand. I walked to the switch on the wall. For a moment I just stared at it. The same switch I'd turned off that morning, thinking it was the end. I flipped it. Click. The fluorescence hummed to life like an old friend clearing its throat. I stood there, looking around the room, feeling the strange fullness of it all. 20 years of loyalty, effort, brilliance, sacrifice. All dismissed in 6 minutes, then restored tenfold because of one truth. They couldn't erase me. Not from the code. Not from the architecture. Not from the legacy. From that day forward, every login, every transaction, every update that system ran would depend on the foundation I built and the signature they now paid me millions to use. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to watch Jordan pack his things or hear the board apologize. All I needed was this one moment. The moment they remembered. I turned the light off one last time and walked out, the door closing quietly behind me.